Hi there. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this water and text effect. I'll just play this little video and you can see the water's pouring into a container and then the text is revealed by the water. So effectively I guess it's a sort of air bubble in the water. Okay. So this tutorial will take you through how to create a water simulation and how to put into it a text effect like this or any other sort of effect that uses the same principles. So to begin with we need to just create a simple water sim. So I'm going to add a simple mesh. We'll just make it a cube. It doesn't really matter what it is. Scale it down a little bit and we'll then go to Object, Quick Effects, Quick Fluid. So immediately we should be able to bake that. So the reason we've already got some fluid there is because it's just gone to the default cache and it's just picked up what I've last rendered. So if we come over to the physics area and we just change the default cache name with an extra letter, you can see it just goes to where it should be, which is just a basic cube. If we go into wireframe view, you can see our original cube is in the middle there, and this is our new domain. So as we're going to want to put some text in there, we need to make that a bit bigger. So I'll just lift that up a little bit. We need to make sure I'll go into orthographic mode. There's a gap underneath, and now what I'll do is I'll press S and X to scale on the X-axis, and we'll take it out that way a little bit. Now I'm going to move this cube up and shrink it a little bit. So if we just play, obviously nothing happens yet because we haven't baked, so we just need to click bake. So I'm just using the default settings at the moment, and you can see it's already created some fluid, and if I press play you can see there it is, and it just drops down to the limits of the domain. Very low resolution at the moment, and one of the things to note is that you have a preview and a final resolution. If you're doing a lot of fluid, particularly if you're doing very high resolution fluid, you will want to see roughly what's happening without necessarily having millions of vertices in the view. You can create a low resolution version as well, but unless you are doing something like that, you can just use the final for the viewport mode, and that tells you exactly what it's going to look like then. And it's still at a relatively low resolution. You'll typically find that you need to turn that up. So we've got a basic fluid, but you'll notice all it's done is it's taken our cube as a volume, created some fluid at that size, and it's just dropping that. And as I want to fill a container up, that's not what I need. So now that I've got the fluid selected, I'm going to change it to an inflow object. We're going to change the inflow method to both, so that means both the surface of this object and its volume will effectively be an inflow for the fluid, so fluid will come through that. So if we select the domain and click bake again, you can see the progress here. It's still low resolution, so it doesn't take too long, and let's see what that looks like. And you can see that there's fluid dripping out of this now, so it will just keep flowing, but it's still fairly slow. So if we select our inflow again, and we can add to the inflow velocity here. So if we put Z at, let's try 1 or -1, see that just changes the direction it goes in. Select the domain again and bake, let it get a little way, and then let's have a look what that's starting to look like. And you can see we now start to get fluid really flowing in at quite a good rate. So that's looking pretty good. You can see it's filling the domain area up quite quickly, and we may need to adjust that later. So now what we need to do is add a container. So we'll just add a cube. We'll make sure it's smaller than the domain in the y-axis, so scale on the y. And if I go outside the bounds, go to wireframe view, we can see where the domain really is. And now we'll scale on the x. Perhaps scale on the z a little bit as well. Scale on the x a bit more and bring it up a little bit. So we've now got a basic cube. So we probably want it to be perhaps a little thicker than that. We don't want it too thick because it'll take too long to fill up otherwise. But we'll scale it a little bit on the Y. Just check our domain again, make sure that we're still within that. Yeah, so that's all fine. Now what we'll do is we'll go into edit mode, face select mode, select this top face, press X and delete faces. So we've got a hollow box now. To make it more realistic, we'll give it some thickness. So we'll go into vertex select mode, select the loop around the top there, E to extrude, and then just press the left mouse button to let it go, and then scale. And you'll usually find it will scale more one way than the other unless you have a complete square. So now I'm just going to scale on the y-axis just to match it up. Yep, that looks about right. Go into wireframe mode, E to extrude, click again, drag it down to somewhere about there. and now just press F and that closes it off. So we've now got a box with some width on it, and so that we can see inside the box we'll put a material on it, and we'll just make it a simple glass material. Default glass isn't all that clear. If I bring some lights up, and I think what we'll do is we'll put a plane in as well. I'm just adding a plane so that we can see what's going on, and I'm just going to lift it up slightly like that, come out of edit mode and add a subdivision surface and make it smooth. So we'll worry about the camera position in a minute, but if we now, I'll just save this and we'll just go to a preview render, come out of edit mode, and you can see that glass is quite dark. And the reason is because the default glass material isn't completely white. So if I push that up, you can see it goes much more clear. So we'll go with that, but obviously I haven't created a proper fluid texture yet either. So that's our glass box, and we now need to make it contain the fluid, and that's fairly straightforward. We go over to the physics panel, we click fluid, and we select the fluid type to obstacle. Go back to the beginning, select our domain and click bake. We'll go into wireframe so we can see what's going on, start playing, and there we go. It's already being contained by the box and starting to fill it up. So if we go into solid view now, you can see there it is. Now it is poking through the box. The main cause of that is because we're carrying out this physics simulation at a very low resolution. When we put it up to a higher resolution, it'll work much better at containing things. But I think we will make the box slightly bigger anyway on the y-axis, scale y, just to give us a little bit more room to maneuver. So the next thing we want to do then is add our text. So I'll just add text, bring it to where we can see it, go into edit mode and whatever text we want, and rotate X 90 and scale it up. So we'll move that to somewhere about there, and we'll put the text inside the box. I'll put it slightly to the front. I'm using Z, by the way, to go into wireframe mode. Come into the text options. Now at this point you can change the font. So to change the font, you may not want the default font, just click this little button here, go to your font files and just pick a font, whatever it is that you want. Most fonts will work, not all of them, but most of them will. It's hard to see a difference with some of them, so we use that one. It's a nice simple one. And then we come up to extrude, so we just use that just to extrude the font a little bit. So you can see if I pull it out of there, it's extruding it backwards. If you want to, you can add a bevel as well, which is this little corner that's developing here to sort of make it a bit smoother. It's not necessary really, and you can make it rounded if you want, like that. So once you've got your text where you want it, it's the right sort of size, I'll scale this up a little bit more. We now need to change it into a mesh. So we go to Object, Convert to Mesh from Curve, and you won't see any difference initially. Go into edit mode though and you'll see lots of vertices. Select them all and remove doubles, because there's typically a lot of doubles, which is where there's basically errors in the mesh. It doesn't really matter too much, but the more vertices you've got, the longer calculations will take, and it's really not necessary to have those. It will just tidy the mesh up a bit doing that. So there's our mesh, and one of the other things that we're going to want to do is make sure that it doesn't render. This is called text at the moment. We'll just turn this off, the little camera off. So that means when we render, it won't show up. It's showing up at the moment because this is a preview render, and I need to unclick the eye as well if I don't want it to show up in previews. And there you go, it's not visible at all. Come back into here and turn the eye back on and it is visible. So we'll bring our text inside the box. We'll go over to our physics options, we'll select fluid again, and again we'll select obstacle. We will select both so that it essentially the fluid won't enter where the text is. So if you like, it's sort of like a bubble. I suggest free slip and then the fluid will just run over it more easily, but you can try different things and see what happens. Generally you won't need to affect anything else. You can do this with animations as well. Obviously that will just add to the complication. So we've got our basic mesh set up, and now what we need to do, I'll go into wireframe mode, we need to select our domain, I'll just save that, and bake. And you can see because it's low resolution it's struggling to get round the text, but you can see that it's avoiding the text. So I'll stop that and we'll put the resolution up. So this is the resolution we're talking about. You only need to change this one if you're using the preview display, and we'll go up to 128, see what that's like, and we'll bake that. And obviously because it's a higher resolution it will take longer to render. So the bake is now complete, so if we click play you can see that's much better, and you can just about see the text being outlined by the fluid. To make this work better, this would need to be rebaked at a higher resolution, probably something like 200 or 250, which would take a lot longer, but that gives you the basic principle of it. Now you can see towards the end of my 250 frames, the container is basically full and it's spilling out. If you don't want that, what we need to do is to animate the inflow object. So there's our inflow object. Obviously we can set the inflow speed to 0, but we'll still get drips coming out at that. So the very easiest way is also to set the size of the cube to 0 at the point that we want it. So if we go up to about here, somewhere around here, it's got enough fluid in. So I'll go one frame before that and we'll select I and we'll say scaling. So that's set a keyframe for the scale, and also we'll put I over there, which sets a keyframe for the inflow rate. We'll go one frame more, we'll press S for scale and type 0 and enter, and we'll also bring this to 0, which is the inflow velocity. So I again, scale and I over that. So now what happens is as it approaches there, it suddenly vanishes. So we'll rebake that, and I'll put the resolution up this time as well. So we need to select the domain, we'll put it up to 200 and start the bake. Baking's completed and we can now see what happens. I've also set this to 200, so we can now see it's outlining the text a little better, and as it fills up we get to around here somewhere in the frames and suddenly the inflow object disappears and the fluid continues to settle. So we can see just there it's disappeared and the last of the fluid drops in and the rest of the fluid just starts to settle. So we can see our liquid there, so we just need to set a texture now and a material for the domain, which is the fluid. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll say used nodes, that's because it sets default materials, and we need to set it to glass, remembering that it won't be completely clear. And what I'll do is I'll give it a slight colour just so that we can see it a little better. Now the default is the index of refraction for glass, which would be the same as the glass container. Water doesn't have the same refractive index as normal glass. It's normally about 1.33. Having set that, we can now have a look at preview render, and there it is, and we can basically see what's going on. At the moment I've got obviously the text showing, but if I turn that off, you can now see that effectively we've got a hole in the water. The text is showing through the water, and again that's 200 resolution for the fluid, and you might want to set that even higher, but essentially that gives you an idea of how to do this effect. So beyond that, it's just simply a matter of setting your lights up. You probably want to have a nice bright light on the left, some ambient light, and possibly a light off behind it to the right somewhere to give you these little highlights. That's roughly the light setup I've got, so that's a basic 3-light setup. I think in the other scene I also had a light down here to try and get some more reflections. Alternatively, what you might want to do is just have a fairly dim light in front and a very bright one behind. The last thing is I've left this inflow cube as visible, so we can select that, and obviously if I select the actual cube rather than the domain, and we can obviously turn that off as well. There it is. You can see it's already turned off for normal render. So that's basically all there is to it, to creating this effect. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you did, let me know. If you've got any requests for other tutorials, I've certainly got a bit of a backlog of tutorials to get through, but I'm always interested in your comments and try to answer all of them. Thanks a lot.